But today's Palm Sunday, so happy Palm Sunday to you. If you're new to the Bible, maybe you are not really that familiar with the life of Christ. Today is the day, a little over 2,000 years ago, when Christ got up on a donkey and rode into the city of Jerusalem, which was a fulfillment of messianic prophecy and ultimately the start of this chain of events that would ultimately lead to his death on a cross. And he did all of that 2,000 years ago so that he could rescue, redeem, and restore the lost. That happened 2,000 years ago, and I can't really think of a better thing for us to meditate on, a better passage of scripture for us to look at today than Psalm 23, especially verse 3. Because even though David didn't know what he was talking about, like 100%, a long time ago, Psalm 23:3 is all about the cross. Look at it with me now. We'll just read this one verse together. We'll read the whole thing together at the end when we close. But look at Psalm 23:3 with me. David says, "He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake." Now maybe you're thinking, what in the world does that have to do with the cross? That line, "He restores my soul," is probably the most powerful and important line in the whole song, but I would also argue it's also probably the most misunderstood and misapplied line as well. For example, mine, "He restores with my emotions and how I was feeling." Like if I was ever feeling down or if I was ever feeling discouraged or depressed, "He restores my soul" to me meant Jesus is going to come along and cheer me up and encourage me and make me feel better in my soul. I would look at other songs in the book of Psalms, like Psalm 43, where David says, "Why are you so downcast, O my soul? Like, put your hope in God and he'll give you strength." And I would kind of read that into Psalm 23, like, oh, that's what David's talking about right now. He's downcast. He's depressed. And he's singing about his shepherd making him feel better. That's how I always read this psalm. I would imagine many of you read it that way too. But what if I were to tell you that that's not at all what David had in mind here? What if I were to tell you that he wasn't singing about being depressed, he wasn't singing about needing someone to cheer him up? What if he was actually singing about being lost and needing someone to come and rescue him? What if I were to tell you that this line has nothing to do with the state of his emotions and everything to do with the state of his actual soul? So fascinating to me, really in these past couple of months as I've been studying Psalm 23 to see that that's exactly what's going on here. For example, in the original Hebrew language, the language that David was writing in, the word he uses for restore is the word shuv. And I would invite you to say that where you are so that you can say some Hebrew if you want to. But that word literally means return or repent. The Greek version of the Old Testament, which is called the Septuagint, uses the word epistrepho, which also literally means to bring back or return. The Arabic versions used a phrase that I'm not even going to try to pronounce because I can't. But it also means he brings me back. Even the Armenian translations from the 5th century put it this way. This is how they translated, "He restores my soul." He brings me back from the wrong path to the right path. In other words, the story that David is singing away from its shepherd, away from the good path, away from the paths of righteousness, and needed to be rescued and brought back. And guys, that's what the cross is all about. When Jesus rode that donkey into Jerusalem and ultimately to his death some 2,000 years ago, he was riding in as a shepherd on a mission to get his lost sheep. The prophet Isaiah put it like this in Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 says this, "But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." Why? Why was he pierced? Why was he punished? Why was he crushed? Because verse 6 says, "We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and so the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. The thing that we need to get about Psalm 23 is that the only way you and I get to sing, "The Lord is my shepherd, I have no more want," and to get to sing about the satisfaction that we have and our deepest longings being met. And the only way that we get to sing, "He leads me into peace and rest and tranquility with green pastures and still waters in his presence." The only way we get to sing that is if we can sing with David, "He restores my soul. He brings me back. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was going on the wrong path. I was doing my own thing. I was going my own way, but he rescued me and caused me to return." In other words, we aren't going to get the blessings of being led by the Good Shepherd until he's actually leading us, okay? Until we stop leading ourselves and start letting him lead us as his own sheep. It all hinges on that. And here's the thing that I want to show you today. We're all lost sheep. Like every single one of us is a lost sheep. All of us have gone astray. Every single one of us has turned to our own way. We've all trespassed, which is the word that basically says we've stepped outside of the boundaries that God laid for his sheep to walk in. We've stepped outside of them. Like Adam and Eve in the garden. You remember this. They had the entire perfect paradise of Eden with everything they wanted. All of their heart's desires except for one tree, one boundary, and they stepped outside of that boundary and they ate the one thing they weren't allowed to do. That's trespassing. It's what the Bible calls sin. It's why Jesus had to come to earth in the first place. He had to come, and ultimately he rode into Jerusalem 2,000 years ago to rescue, redeem, and restore our souls from sin. He had to become sin for us. He had to take our place. He had to take our pain. He had to take our punishment so that we could be brought back into the presence of God. Now, I know that that's going to land countless different ways for a lot of you, especially if you're new to the Bible and you've never been to a church that has talked about sin before. It's uncomfortable. It's not good news, and I get that. In the story of the gospel, bad news always comes first. The good news follows it. In fact, the good news is so good because of how bad the bad news is that comes before it. In other words, forgiveness isn't good news until you realize that all you deserve is punishment. And when you realize that, then all of a sudden forgiveness is incredible news. Mercy means absolutely nothing until our sin is actually exposed. And all the things we do in the darkness, everything we've ever thought, everything we've ever felt is magnified in front of everyone to see. Then mercy becomes really important because we know we're actually really messed up. No one just is able to see it. And so the gospel's two parts. First, we're lost. We've gone astray like sheep. We've wandered away from our shepherd. And we've done our own thing, and our sins are piling up against us. But the second part of the gospel is that our shepherd who loves us gives up his own life to rescue us. Jesus said in John 10:11, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep." That's what it looks like to rescue lost sheep. Now, what I want to do today is I really just want to focus on 4 possible responses to Christ's rescue mission. And I'm reading from my computer today because our printer's broken, so bear with me. This is really hard to figure out for me. I know that Jesus came to rescue all of us. God doesn't will that any would perish. When Jesus rode on that donkey, he had humanity in mind. He wanted to save his lost sheep. And yet, not all of us receive him, and not all of us want to be rescued by him. And why is that? Well, I think that there's 4 kinds of lost sheep, and I think that these are the 4 reasons that there are different responses to the rescue mission that Christ came to carry out. And while all of us fit into at least one of these categories, or maybe 2, or maybe we are a little bit of both, or we're back and forth, only one of these kinds of sheep can sing with David, I once was lost, but now I'm found. So I want to unpack these with you. Bear with me if you're new to the Bible, if this is uncomfortable, because there's a lot of good news coming. The first kind of lost sheep is the sheep that's lost but doesn't think it's lost, or doesn't know it's lost, or doesn't really see the gravity of its situation. I have a lot of friends in this category. I have friends who are certain they know where they are, they know where they're going, they know they're going in the right direction, they live good and moral lives, they're upstanding citizens, they're hard workers, they're even generous with their time and money. Some of them even go to church. So you look at them and you say, like, those are good people. There is no way that they could actually be lost and in need of rescue. Maybe the guy down in the county jail, maybe the Hitler, maybe the thief, maybe the murderer, maybe the adulterer, whatever, but not these people, not you. And I'm sure that's where some of you are who are watching me right now. And so when the Bible comes along and says in Romans 3:23 that all of us have sinned and all of us have fallen short of the glory of God, that all of us have earned punishment for our sin. When Ephesians 2:1-3 comes along and says that we're dead in our trespasses and sins, and then has the audacity to say that we are enslaved to the desires of our flesh and the ideas of our culture and even the devil himself, that's repugnant to us. Like, we reject that. That's offensive. We have no desire to hear that. It's enraging. Especially for my generation, because my generation, we grew up with everyone telling us how special we are and how great we are, and I had so many trophies for nothing. And so it's difficult to swallow to have this Bible come along and say, listen, you are actually lost and in need of rescue. But the question I want to ask you today, if you're struggling with that, or maybe you're this kind of sheep, is if we're all intrinsically good, if we're all doing okay, except for the random people who are in jail or who have done really bad stuff, why is our world so messed up? Why is our world the way that it is? Think about this quote from Dr. John Stott, who wrote, "Many of the happenings of civilized society would not exist if it weren't for human sin. A promise is not enough. We need a contract. Doors are not enough. We have to lock them and bolt them. Every single night, Caroline asked me, did you lock the door? The payment of fares is not enough. We have to be issued tickets which are punched, inspected, and collected. Law and order aren't enough. We need police to enforce them. We cannot trust each other. We need protection from one another. It's a sorry state of affairs." Or D.L. Moody, who once wrote, "If a man is stealing nuts and bolts from a railroad track, and in order to change him, you send him to college, at the end of his education, he will steal the whole railroad." You see, the myth of progress, or the myth of modernity, essentially said that all we need is just a little more information. All we need is just a little more education, and all of the problems of the world will be solved because we are basically good. But then the 19th century came along with all of these scientific breakthroughs and all of these technological advancements, and rather than solving all of our problems, it made everything worse. Rather than giving us new ways to care for each other, it gave us new ways to kill each other. Holocausts, genocides, atomic bombs, and on it goes. More people were killed in the 19th century by itself than every other century in human history combined. If that isn't enough proof of our intrinsic lostness, just look at what we've done to the planet. It shouldn't go over our heads that even the humanists are now saying that the greatest problem and the greatest threat to planet Earth is you and me. Because our bondage to greed and our bondage to selfishness and to pride, because of all of those things, even our good deeds are done for the praise and approval and acceptance of our peers. We are messing everything up. The enslavement of sin is a deep bondage. It's as deep as anyone could imagine. Someone who was in torment once cried out as he was wrestling with his own state, the state of his own soul. He said, "Intense is the agony when the eye begins to see, the ear begins to hear, the pulse begins to throb, the heart begins to pound, when the soul feels its flesh and the flesh feels its chains." Our condition as human beings is that we have this sin that's tainting our souls. We're in bondage to it. It's ruining everything out there. It's breaking our relationships. It's breaking our world. And at the core, it's because we've been separated from God. George Orwell once wrote about a wasp that was bugging him during one of his meals. And I think that this essay or this illustration or this image is a picture of us as humans. He wrote, "The wasp was sucking jam on my plate, and so I cut it in half." Very, very nice. He paid no attention, though. He merely went on with his meal, while a tiny stream of jam trickled out of his severed esophagus. Only when he tried to fly away did he grasp the dreadful thing that had happened to him. Guys, I think that a lot of people today, a lot of my friends are living like that wasp, feasting on life while at the same time being totally oblivious to the fact that half of their bodies are cut off, that they're lost and they don't know it, or at least they don't see it, or they don't think it. And since they don't see it, when the rescuer comes riding in on a donkey and when he dies in their place, they don't receive him because they don't think they need him. They scoff and they turn away. That's the first kind of lost sheep. The second kind of lost sheep is totally different. It's the sheep who knows it's lost, but thinks it's too lost to ever be found. Maybe you're listening to me today and you're not like that first kind of sheep. You actually know you're messed up. You don't struggle with thoughts of arrogance and pride. You struggle with thoughts of shame and guilt. You've made so many mistakes. You've hurt so many people. In your wake is nothing but wreckage and debris. How could anyone, especially a perfect and holy and righteous God, ever love you? In your mind, you think you're too far gone. And yet, over and over and over again, Jesus says and proves the complete opposite. For example, there's a story in Luke 15 where Jesus is hanging out with sinners and tax collectors. He's eating dinner with the most hated, the most disgusting, the most despicable people on the planet at the time. And all of the really godly people, all of the really good people, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the teachers, they are ticked off. Look at Luke 15:2 with me. I think we're going to put it in the comments, hopefully. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and even eats with them. How dare he? Who does he think he is?" But look at what he says. Then Jesus told them this parable. "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then calls all of his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent." Guys, the greater your sin is, the greater my sin is, the greater our experience of mercy will be. The greater our shame is, the greater our experience of love and acceptance will be. The greater our need for rescue is, the greater our experience of His joy will be when we're actually brought back. I read this story this past week about a really unlucky and unlovely dog that was lost by its owner. The owner wanted to find him so badly that he offered a huge cash reward. He was willing to sacrifice greatly just to get his dog back. This is what his lost dog sign read. He's only got 3 legs. He's blind in the left eye. He's missing a right ear. His tail has been broken off. He was neutered accidentally by a fence. Ouch. And that's on the sign. He's almost deaf. And he answers by the name Lucky. Guys, I think it's safe to say that the only thing lucky about this dog was the fact that it was loved so much by its owner that his owner was willing to sacrifice greatly to bring it back. The truth is that our sin has marred us and scarred us and deformed us. Every single one of us. We're all missing legs. We're all missing ears and eyes and tails. We've all been ravaged by the effects of sin. And our case would be utterly hopeless if it weren't for the fact that Jesus is a friend of sinners. He didn't just sacrifice greatly for us sinners. He sacrificed everything to bring us back. So if you know you're lost, but you think that you're too lost to ever be found, you need to hear this today. And please hear it. He is the good shepherd, and he has already left the 99 in the open pasture so that he can come and find you and bring you back. You're not too far gone. He loves you, and he wants to restore your soul. The third kind of lost sheep is what I would say is kind of a blend of both and still unique. It's the sheep that knows it's lost, but think it can find its own way back. I'll never forget the time when I was 10 years old and I got lost in Japan. My dad was visiting some missionaries there, and he took me along for the ride because I went to this international magnet school, and I actually was studying Japanese in my grade school, and it was just an opportunity for me to try out my limited vocabulary, which I thought was pretty extensive at that point in time. I had so much confidence in my little handy vocab book and my skills that I was going to take with me. I had been studying, I was ready to go, and one day while we were there, there was a boy and a girl that were close to my age, a little bit older, and then me. We all went to one of their friends' houses that was several blocks away from their own home. And at one point, we were hanging out and they were watching a movie, and I can remember just getting bored. And I was like, guys, I want to go back. Like, I just want to go rest and hang out back at the house. And being the good hosts that they were, they offered to take me back. But being the overconfident little 10-year-old that I was, I said, no, I got this. I know how to get back. I can do it on my own. Way too much confidence in myself, by the way, for a 10-year-old. Totally unfounded. Because after walking for about 20 minutes or so, I realized that I had no idea where I was going, didn't recognize anything around me, and I was completely lost. But I didn't lose hope. In that moment, I still had all of this confidence that I could communicate in Japanese and I could talk to someone and I could use my own resources and I could get back. And so I saw this person doing yard work in their front yard, and I was like, perfect opportunity. I'm going to try out my Japanese. And I walked over to this person and I greeted them with a konnichiwa in perfect Japanese, which means good afternoon. But as soon as I said konnichiwa, I realized I don't know what to say next. I don't know how to communicate I'm lost. I don't know how to say I don't know where I am. I don't know how to describe the petite family. I don't know how to describe their house or say anything in Japanese beyond konnichiwa, where's the bathroom, which I can't even say that anymore. So I just stood there waving my arms and trying to act it out to this person like a game of charades. And he just kept shaking his head no. And then finally he just shooed me off. And so at that point, my confidence in myself was at an all-time low. I had gone from the king of Japan to scared and weepy little boy. And then it started to rain. So there I was, alone, afraid, soaking wet, totally convinced that I would never see my dad again. I'd never see my family again, let alone my country. I'll never forget just standing there, hopeless and defeated and depressed and crying, drenched. And off in the distance, I saw a shadow or a silhouette through the rain of someone walking toward me with an umbrella. And as the person got closer, I realized this person's walking like directly toward me. I still couldn't make out who it was, but I was just standing there. Like I wasn't going to try to do the charades game again with a random Japanese person. And then when this person got about 20 feet away from me, I realized, it's one of my hosts. He had come to find me, and he brought me back home. I think in so many ways is a picture of the human race, guys. So confident in our own ability to do good. So convinced that we can earn our way back into the presence of God with our own skill and our own resources and our own effort. But that couldn't be further from the truth. We aren't smart enough and we're not skilled enough. We'll never be able to work hard enough to get back into the presence of God. All of our efforts to gain our own righteousness are an effort in futility. That's what Romans 3:23 means by we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We'll never reach His glory or His perfection, and that's the standard that it takes to be in His presence. There was a sign that used to hang above the gates of Auschwitz during World War II that all of the Jews would read on their way into that horrific death camp. The words on the sign were profound, and they were obviously in German, which I can't pronounce because it's a hard language to pronounce. But in English, it said, "Work makes free." Work makes free. And it meant that work would liberate them and give them freedom. The Nazis put this sign up hoping that it would make the Jews work harder while they were in their camp if they thought that freedom was on the other side of their work. But of course it was a lie. Work makes free was a false hope. The only thing they found at the end of their work was horrifying suffering and death. That sign is so haunting to me because the lie that was painted on it is the same lie that so many people in our world believe today. It's the lie that you can earn your way or work your way back to God. Work makes free. If I could just do enough works to outweigh all of my bad works, surely I would be able to find my way back. This is the false hope of every single religion known to man. If you sacrifice more, if you meditate more, pray more, fast more, give more, go to church more, if you work harder or take the pilgrimage or talk to the priest or say the Hail Marys, if you can do all of that, then you can work your way back to God and He'll let you into His presence. Heaven, paradise, nirvana, enlightenment, whatever it is that you're chasing, whatever it is that you call it, is just a lifetime of work away. It's the false hope of every single religion except for the way of Jesus. Don't turn me off yet. His message is the complete opposite of every other religion on the face of the planet. Just imagine with me for a second a mountain, with all of us little people at the bottom of the mountain and the perfect, holy, righteous, glorious God at the top of the mountain. There's a huge gap between us. Religion is man's attempt to get all of us little people up the mountain and back into the presence of God. From sin to righteousness, from despair to peace, from chaos to beauty, from the transient to the eternal, or whatever. The goal of every single religion is to somehow carve out a path up the mountain so that we'll be able to climb up to God. And while different paths might look different, essentially they're all saying the same thing, and basically all roads lead to the same God. I got so many friends who believe that notion. You can do something to get up there. But then Jesus comes along and He says, no, guys. No, No, that's not true. There's absolutely nothing that you can do to get back up to my Father. He's too perfect. He's too holy. If you stand in his presence, you're going to get crushed because of your sin. You can't do anything to get up there. And so the message of Christ stands apart from every other world religion and every other religious leader and guru and teacher in the history of the world, because all of them are saying you can find a way back to God. But Jesus is saying you'll never find a way, so God has come down to you. Totally different messages. Since you'll never be able to climb up the mountain and work your way into the presence of God, he has done the work and come down the mountain. He became one of us so that he could rescue us and redeem us and restore our souls so that we might return to him. And so he actually says in John 14:6, I am the way. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. If you want to get back to God, let me pick you up, put you on my shoulders, and let me carry you there. I love how one author put it when he wrote, most ailments need particular specific antidotes. Increasing the air pressure in your tires will not fix a troubled carburetor. Aspirin will not dissolve a tumor. Cutting up credit cards will not wipe out debt that's already owed. If your water pipes are leaking, you can call a plumber, and you should, not an oncologist. But a plumber cannot cure cancer. Any adequate solution must solve the problem that needs to be solved. And singular problems need singular solutions. Some antidotes are one-of-a-kind cures for one-of-a-kind ailments. Sometimes only one medication will do the job, as much as we may like to think it's otherwise. I mean, we're feeling that with COVID-19 right now, honestly. We're waiting for that one-of-a-kind remedy, medication to fix that virus. And then he says, mankind suffers a singular problem. People are broken. And the world is broken because our friendship with God has been broken. It's been ruined by human rebellion. Humans, you and I, are guilty, enslaved, lost, and dead. All of us, everyone, everywhere. The guilt must be punished. The debt must be paid. The slave must be purchased. Promising better conduct in the future will not mend the crimes of the past. No, a rescuer must ransom the slaves. A kindred brother must pay the family debt. A substitute must shoulder the guilt. There's no other way of escape. So if you're a sheep that knows you're lost and you're trying to work your way back to God, you need to hear this. The message of Christ is stop your effort because none of it will be enough. He came 2,000 years ago to hang on a cross and do the work for you. That leads to the fourth kind of lost sheep, and that's the kind of sheep that David was. It's the kind of sheep that we all need to be. It's a sheep that knows it's lost and cries out for help. When sheep actually realize they're lost, the first thing they do is they immediately try to find a bush or a thicket to hide in, and then they start bleating as loud as possible in hopes that their shepherd will hear them and come and rescue them. Their legs aren't strong enough to kick. Their teeth aren't sharp enough to bite. Their brains aren't smart enough to find their way back. All they can do is hide there and cry out for help, hoping that the shepherd will hear him before the dogs do or the lions. When the shepherd finally finds his sheep, the sheep is so scared and it's shaking so uncontrollably that it can't stand up. And so the only way to get the sheep back to the flock is for the shepherd to kneel down, pick the sheep up, gently put it over its shoulders, and take it home. Carry it back. David had experienced this firsthand, not only as a shepherd who had lost and found countless sheep, but also as a lost sheep himself, who had been rescued and found and brought back. In fact, when you read the rest of the Psalms, which I would encourage you to do, especially during this season, one of the themes that shows up over and over and over again is David's frantic and desperate cry for help. He needs to be rescued. He was one of the mightiest warriors in the day. He had killed Goliath with a sling and a stone. He had killed tens of thousands of his enemies, and yet he knew that if God didn't show up and save him, he wouldn't survive. He wouldn't make it. And I think that this is the place that every single one of us needs to find ourselves. We need to be in that place because this is the place where rescue can actually happen. It's the place of humility. It's the place of dependence and of recognition that we need a shepherd to kneel down, to pick up our trembling bodies, put us on his shoulders, and carry us back to God, to carry us home. A great example of a guy who got this was a guy by the name of John Newton. Newton was a slave trader in the 18th century, and he lived with moral abandon. There was ever a hedonist, it was him. He once wrote this: "I sinned with a high hand, and I made it my study to tempt and seduce others." He worked for a slave trader named Clow, who owned a plantation on an island off the coast of West Africa. But Clow was cruel, and he was a wicked man, even more wicked than Newton, and he ruined Newton's life. And so at one point, Newton found himself clothed in rags. He had to beg for food. He was totally destitute and humiliated. And it was at that point in his life that he realized his life was ruined, and he cried out for help. He cried out for rescue, and God saved his soul. He restored him. Several years later, he would write a song which to this day is still one of the favorite songs for those sheep who were once lost and have now been found. And it goes like this, and I'm sure you've heard it. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, that showed us that we weren't good." Just to add that, taught my heart to fear, but then grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares we have already come. It was grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace that will lead us home. Grace that will lead us home. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Guys, I don't know where you are today, but I know that 2,000 years ago, the Son of God climbed down the mountain. He became one of us, not just so that he could communicate with us, but so that he could die in our place, taking our pain and our punishment and the wrath of God on our behalf, so that he could buy us and bring us back, so that he could ransom the slave and free those who were once in bondage. Cry out to him today. Like a lost sheep, cry out to him today. Ask him to save you. Ask him to rescue you. Ask him to bring you back, so that you, like King David, can sing, "He restores my soul." He is the good shepherd, and he willingly laid down his life for you so that he could rescue you and bring you back. Let me close by reading this psalm over us again. Would you bow your heads and pray with me? "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside Beside quiet waters, he refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. So now your goodness and your mercy and your love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I hope that encourages you today, wherever you are. Cry out to the Good Shepherd and he will rescue you. If you need help, if you want to talk through some of this, if you have questions, shoot me a message or just connect with us on Facebook or an email or whatever. I love you. Life Church, I hope you're well. Join us on our prayer time every morning at 8. We'll see you soon.